Hello and namaste friends. In the first part of this tutorial, we discuss the general tenor and direction of the Hindu search for superhuman power or powers. In this second part, we are going to be talking about the details of their actual search. Although an exact historical or chronological order is difficult to assign to this spiritual journey, its general outline and the broader features can be gleaned from a minute study and committed analysis of the sacred texts. But before we go into the actual steps of this process, I want you to remember that they were not taken one step at a time, but went more or less simultaneously, though one idea might dominate at one time or the other. This probe into the unknown by the pioneering Hindus began with a look around their world. The first area to come under their microscope being the major forces of nature. The Hindu sages, whom they called rishis, found themselves wondering if the supreme power was the sun or Surya that outshines everything, the all-consuming fire or Agni, the ubiquitous waters that hold enormous force but is gentle enough to be truly life-giving. They called it Varuna. The heart-rending lightning and thunder, Indra. The wrenchingly powerful winds, they called Marut or Vayu, or perhaps the lofty mountains with all their mass and mystery. Would one of these or some other natural force answer the question of who rules and controls everything? They elevated each in sequential manner to the highest pedestal, raising it to the level of supreme divinity. They gave every one of them a turn at their full attention through supplication, worship, rituals, and contemplation, and in all the other ways they knew. They questioned, they studied, and they observed. This sequential deification has sometimes been termed Hinduism. They persisted with this concept for a long time, but eventually abandoned it as none of these forces of nature met their criteria of the supreme power. Next, their focus fell on various types of energy or the pranas. Is it possible that it was not the forces of nature by themselves, but the energy that drove them and everything else in the universe? Maybe the apparent omnipotence of these natural forces was in fact due to the energy that animated them. Well, was this all-pervasive energy the supreme being? The seekers went through another round of testing and analyzing, this time revolving around the energy and its various forms and manifestations, but found this hypothesis to be wanting as well. They decided they must go on further. Very early in their search, the rituals gained an overriding importance. Believing in the interconnectedness of everything, they hoped to reach God through repetitious performance of certain rituals and ceremonies, which they felt had the power to bridge the dimension separating them from the supreme existence. They learned much, but it failed to lead them to their main objective. So they moved on again. These rituals, however, have maintained a validity right down to the current times for various reasons that we will take up in the tutorial on Hindu rituals. The concept of a personal god was examined early. The idea of a supreme power that creates the universe and then rules it by a fiat is simple and easy, as mentioned in the section on Revelation. For most people, it is quite appealing since it is psychologically comforting to surrender to a superior being. Intellectually too, it is the least demanding. Ancient Hindu thinkers could have stopped right there, as people have done with other religions. But Hindu explorers of spirit, those intrepid sages, were made of a different stuff. The lines of least resistance could not tempt them. They wanted the truths and not cop-outs. Convinced that the supreme power or existence was much more transcendent, they rejected the concept of a personal god as rather childish and therefore too ordinary. For them, it failed to explain so many things. They did, however, appreciate its ease and popular appeal as something useful for the beginners and the less motivated, and therefore decided to use it to create the concept of Saguna Brahman as a stepping stone in the pursuit of inspired enlightenment. This will come up again when we talk about Bhakti Yoga in a future tutorial. Looking for a more satisfactory answer, they forged ahead, their nimble minds looking to scale higher and even more rarefied atmospheres. And their quest took an even more esoteric and mystical direction. And thanks to this orientation, torrents of Hindu thought and philosophy flowed on, ever widening and ever increasing in volume, flooding the land with their rich deposits and laying fertile ground for the greatest denouement of all. Well, to be more specific, since they were not having much success with the objects and the phenomena of the world around them, they started wondering if they should look inwards, inside their own selves. If God was not to be found outside of them, why not look inside? They decided to plow wholeheartedly into this possibility, turning their searchlights inwards into the world of their inner beings. I imagine that they must have figured out very early that this inward march would be much more arduous than the outside one. Don't think that meditation and contemplation were the only components of this inward spiritual journey. A cornucopia of techniques ranging from the simplistic to the extreme had to be devised and tested. Prolonged periods of uncertainty and repeated failures must have been expected as normal for such an undertaking. The odds had to be daunting, but clearly failed to deter these resolute soldiers of spirit. Their efforts included various kinds of prayer and supplication, worship and other expressions of devotion, rituals, sacrifices from ritualistic to substantial, controlling of the body and senses with techniques like yoga and tapas, intense concentration, mental exercises, and austerities to deny their ego. Such austerities included, among other things, extreme acts like severe and prolonged fasting, silence for years on a stretch, meditation for extended periods while sitting or standing in the same position or standing in the cold running rivers on one leg, renunciation not only of material comforts but all sensory pleasures, total withdrawal of the use of physical senses, and many others that have become the stuff of the Lord. All these acts which I mentioned were the various components of their experimentation, and not unexpectedly, many of them proved not fruitful and were abandoned. Their commitment to the cause and the amazing perseverance, however, continued undiminished. Millions left their homes to spend lives as ascetics, to pursue spirituality in undisturbed seclusion of the forests and mountains. The overall scope and scale of this centuries-long project seems implausible today, especially when one considers that it was exercised at the level of individual effort without institutional support, sponsorship, or organization. Well, they marched on and on. It took a long time, but eventually their look inside approach started bearing fruit. Door after door opened as they tore into the deepest recesses of their being until they reached this space, which lies inside the body but beyond intellect and beyond mind. At the core of this space, they saw a light, happily discovering that it was nothing but a spark of God Himself, the object of their search. Not only did they see Him, but went on to connect with His presence and eventually merged and became one with Him. As they had found God, they realized that God was also the reality of their own existence. They designated the presence of God inside them Atman, spelled Atman. Next, they broadcast their discovery to the world. Brahm, the ultimate one, lives inside us, not figuratively, but in reality. They also established that the contact with reality was less an encounter than a union with it, a fusing of one's own identity with God, the parent source of everything. This is the condition which they designated the state of moksha. As we will learn in future tutorials, this God realization by the seeker has implications for the seeker himself as well as for the world at large. As the seeker has found, completely identified and unionized with the ultimate divinity inside him, he becomes just like it. Or, in other words, he becomes like God. Having procured their objective, most of these seekers or sages continue to live like everyone but use their time to teach others about what they had seen and learned. They also acted as guides for others so they could emulate them. Thanks to their guidance and leadership, this world became a better place to live, and the spiritual world came within the reach of everybody. The world owes as much to their role as teachers as to their role as explorers and discoverers. People tend not to stop and think about it, but even a partial reading of the ancient literature can open one's eyes to what a monumental endeavor it was. According to Max Muller, they, or the ancient seers, climbed up to the heights where only their lungs could breathe and those of others would have burst. Chakravarti Rajagopalachari similarly stated, the spacious imagination, the majestic sweep of thought, and the almost reckless spirit of exploration, urged on by a compelling thirst of truth, makes these ancients also the most modern. I am gratified to report that the flame of independent thinking and exploration has not extinguished from the Hindu society even after several millennia of adverse circumstances. We still come across such sages, though their numbers may have dwindled to a trickle in modern times. Further explorations and the flow of ideas have not stopped either. Next, we come to the implications of this method, which I consider is very important because this is what makes Hinduism so unique and so commendable. The Hindu search for truth has brought to the humanity many gifts in pinpointing the ultimate truth and devising ways to reach it. They also have brought home some lessons only if humanity will pay attention. Well, here are a few. Number one, inspired enlightenment is egalitarian. It has no inner hierarchy or inner circle as revelation does. The Supreme Being and the possibility of communion with Him are not the monopoly of a chosen few. God instead represents a door that everyone and anyone can open and explore. The only requirement is the desire, the will, and a sincere approach. There is no need for brokering middlemen or agencies either. Number two, the path to God is not narrow and exclusionary, as it is in some other religions where it is monopolized and controlled by clergy, institutions, or organizations. One can follow any route or means to get there. One can use one of the suggested well-traveled paths or chart one's own course, customized according to one's own inclinations and capabilities, as long as it does not conflict with some fundamental laws of nature and some universal laws of good conduct as defined in Dharma, which we'll talk about later. Third point, Hinduism not only accepts but welcomes new ideas. The truth is thought to be something that needs to be experienced and not spoon-fed to a person. Therefore, Hinduism refuses to be merely a belief system, creed, or doctrine to which to subscribe and to adhere. The Hindu seers believe that they have plucked out some pearls of truth, but also that many others are still hanging out there, undiscovered, perhaps undetected. That is why the questions or new approaches are not shouted down as blasphemous. In fact, Hinduism has never invented or put much stock on words like heretic, skeptic, unbeliever, apostasy, heresy, blasphemy, and so on. A religious bigotry is fundamentally alien to Hinduism's worldview. Hinduism's contribution in the current communal disharmony in India has actually been blamed on Hinduism's Semitization, which in any case is mostly reactive to the aggressive assaults on it by other religions. In that sense, it is defensive in nature. Some people consider them to be reflective of social and political turf wars having nothing to do with Hindu ideology or the religion itself. Whatever the cause of their genesis, such conflicts are without doubt painful and incur human and social costs. But Hinduism's basic temper of tolerance and acceptance has never failed and is bound to prevail in the long run. This brings us to our implication number 4, which states that the possibility of human life are immense. The whole idea of inspired enlightenment voices a clarion call to human beings that you have untapped, unlimited fountains of potential inside you. You can touch the highest of the highs. Your ignorance and limitations conceal it, but you are already divine. This is the promise of your being, and you should do your best to realize it. You can achieve perfection, and it can be done in this life itself. Number 5, the Hindu method is based on search and find sort of philosophy. In that sense, it is natural and spontaneous. Not surprisingly, therefore, it harmonizes and reconciles all sincere efforts to unravel the mysteries of universe and thus bring happiness and salvation to mankind. Its central message was never addressed to a particular sect of people or a group of followers, but to mankind as a whole. Number 6, unlike the absolutist religions, Hinduism can never create ideologies that would reject approaches diverging from its own. Hindus believe that light is light and has the right to shine, whatever its source. Hinduism considers itself to be a spiritual system which is still exploring, still discovering, and always ready to accept new and honest approaches to the truth, making it blissfully free from the shackles that dogma imposes. It deems other religions to be so many attempts by human beings to uncover the truth. The final and the 7th implication is that Hinduism believes in logic, right thinking, and right action, not in blind faith and the actions based on blind faith. In any case, this brings us to the end of the second tutorial. In it, we outlined how the Hindus actually proceeded with their extraordinary idea of meeting up with God directly and its implications for the human beings. Thank you very much for watching this tutorial. Please share and like it if you find it useful and thus contribute towards spreading the universal message of Hinduism. Thank you very much. Have a great day.